Uju, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Capacity Building Center for Tribes. And thank you, Laura, as always, for that tech information and just your ability to always keep things running smoothly for us. As folks are joining, I would love it if you could tell us who you are in the chat room, perhaps your name, tribe that you work with, or if you're coming from the state, that would be wonderful as well. And if there is anything pressing that you feel you need to hear from us or the speakers, feel free to include that as well. And again, I just mentioned the state folks. So typically our webinars are for tribal child welfare professionals, but because of this content, we decided to invite our state child welfare professionals. So I want to recognize them and also know that, when we work collaboratively together, we see improved outcomes for our families. So welcome everyone to this webinar. As Laura mentioned in the first webinar of this two-part series, we heard about some of the work happening in Nebraska with the Native Families for Native Children work. And we had so many takeaways from that presentation. And I pulled a couple of quotes from the evaluation, some things that you were talking about. Things like, I always enjoy hearing what other tribal programs are doing to recruit foster homes. The presenters had years of experience as Native persons and had a timeline that was very helpful. Some of you felt for the first one that it was very informative and it relates to just the day-to-day concerns that you guys are all doing. And also that Native families do better when placed with their family or community. And so I just wanted to let you guys know how much that means to us with the Center for Tribes, just to hear your feedback, to know, what it is that works for you. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and get started. Today's webinar is, of course, part 2 of this two-part series. And the Central Council of the Tlingit and Haida tribes of Alaska collaboratively developed foster and kinship care licensing standards. And the presenters today will share the licensing standards and the tools they utilize and information on how they train their staff and maintain those best practices. They will also talk about how the tribes in the state of Alaska work together, because we know that we hear back from a lot of tribes is that, again, that collaboration, that cooperative agreement. So we're going to hear from them around the work they've done together to navigate licensing regulations and achieve those dual license recognition. So I am going to just let you all know today's presenters are Mary Johnson, Director of the Tribal Family and Youth Services, and she's with the Central Council of Tlingit and Haida, as well as Rachel Hanft. She's the Family Support Specialist with the Alaska Center for Resource Families. And then we also have Barbara Cosolito. She is the Social Service Program Office with the Office of Children's Services. So with that, I'm excited. I want to get started. This webinar will be an hour and a half. So I want to quickly turn it over to Mary and have her continue to introduce yourselves. But again, feel free to use the chat room. Mary.
Thank you, Jackie, and good afternoon, everyone. We are so excited to share the work that we have been doing here in Alaska. And the key really here is collaboration. First of all, I want to acknowledge that we are on Aquan land and Taku Kwan land here in Juneau. That's where we're presenting from. Rachel is in Fairbanks. I was born and raised in Sitka. My family is from the Bethel region. My Yupik name is Mizek. I have been working in child welfare for quite some time now. It's hard to believe it's gone by so fast. I went to school in Fairbanks in 1998 to go to school for social work and worked up there for 20 years at Tananachi's conference, and recently, within the past 2 years, have been working here at Tlingit and Haida. So what we're going to talk about today is efforts that we put forth statewide. So I've been involved in this work throughout the state through our Tribal State Collaboration Group. So I'm excited to share the information that we have with everyone on the call today.
It's morning in Juneau, Alaska. So good morning from Alaska. I'm Barbara Cosolito. I am the program manager for foster care licensing. I also manage the ICPC program and the OCS background check program. I've been working in child welfare in Alaska for a little over 12 years. I'm originally from Arizona, and it was my dream to work in Alaska, so I moved to Alaska. So welcome to today's presentation.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Rachel Hanft. I am the Family Support Specialist at the Alaska Center for Resource Families. We're grant funded through the state of Alaska to provide training and education and support to foster, adoptive, kinship care, and guardianship families. And I'm calling in from Dene Lands here in the center in the heart of Alaska. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, friends, for your introductions. So today we are going to talk about how in Alaska we have been able to move forward through collaboration. We're going to talk some about the history of Alaska's tribal licensing standards and where we're at today and our hopes and dreams that go along with that. So there's so much information to share. I think in the world of child welfare and ICWA in particular, the work that we do can be so adversarial at times that it's really hard to build up strong partnerships and connections with, if you work for a tribal organization, with your state partners or other community partners. And I remember when I first started in child welfare, there was always a lot of, why can't you share this information? Why do we have to make this so hard for families? Why aren't we doing our jobs? That along with the really hard work, and I really want to acknowledge the hard work that child welfare is, specifically ICWA, because we are working with families and children that are traumatized. Then we're working in a system that is getting by. It's just getting by, and throughout the years we have been working on work where we have seen where the system has evolved to where we've been able to create some of the work that we're going to share with you today. So it took the vision of tribes wanting to see better outcomes with ICWA compliance. And as we were looking at that, we saw the need to look at how to recruit and retain foster homes, both tribal and state foster homes. And we have had the opportunity to work with KC Family Programs to where we had, we participated in, it was a national effort where KC invited tribes to come in and create a recruitment and retention plan. And that was one small piece that gave us a jump start in this work. And we'll talk more about that as we go along in the presentation. Also, the work generated from the efforts of our tribal state collaboration group. The tribal state is what we call it. Is a group of tribal child welfare leaders from all around the state. We have 229 tribes in the state, and then also the Office of Children's Services, so our state administration that oversees child welfare. We all get together. Again, there's been, it has evolved over time to where we used to get together 3 times a year and work. And it used to be sitting around a table trying to figure out how to conquer some challenges that we were having. But then we evolved it into work groups and really trying to be proactive and change. And then we wanted to share some of the exciting work that's going on in Alaska currently, which I know those three of us, myself, Barb, and Rachel, have been working together for many years and have been waiting to see something like this happen. So as soon as we saw the opportunity, we jumped on it. And it's our goal to see some outcomes sometime, hopefully within the next five years, right, Barb? So we are going to move forward and share this presentation with you all. So Alaska, one of the things that we have focused on is the high disproportionality rate in our state. Over 65% of the children who are in out-of-home placements are Alaska Native or American Indian children. And the overall population of Alaska Natives in our state is about 20%. So when you think about that, that's quite a disproportionate number of kids in custody. And when we sat down at the table, we talked about why is this number so high? How, that we see a lot of healthy Alaska Native families around us. Why do we have a 65% rate of children in state custody? And like I mentioned earlier, with the work being so difficult, we need to find some way to make a difference or to find some joy in the job. That on top of tackling the disproportionality and the disparity in our state, where Barbara and Rachel have really come in is to help us with our efforts to recruit and retain licensed foster homes. And I'm going to give the opportunity to Barbara or Rachel to share information here.
I just wanted to share one point on the slide. It says the need to license relatives. So in Alaska, what we've done is, according to our statutes, Alaska is required to license a foster home within 45 days of receiving a completed application. So in Alaska right now, all relative placements are going through our licensing unit. Our licensing units reach out to all new relative homes. We send the licensing application to the relatives if they wish to become licensed. And then we also follow up by signing it to the relative home to one of our frontline licensing workers, who then provides continuous contact and assistance with that relative to assist them in becoming licensed. So we're giving a lot more eyes and contact to our relative placements.
Yeah, thank you, Barbara. And I think in our state, because when we work in ICWA, we often hear, how a lot of people feel it's unfair that we focus on ICWA. The one thing that I like to point out in Alaska is, like Barb said, in our state, it is in statute that we focus on relative placements for all children, not just Alaska Native children. So I always want to highlight that as well, because the work that we do on the tribal side of things can impact and make positive change for all children in Alaska. Rachel, I don't know if
I was just going to add onto what Barbara said, and then some regions, there's 5 regions separated for the Office of Children's Services, and in some regions, licensing will send our office a list of relative caregivers that have recently had placement. So while OCS is following up on the technical piece of licensing and timelines, we're getting in support of training, resources that are available, and making sure that that placement is set up for success for the long term.
Yeah, thank you. And in Alaska, our state is so huge, and I've lived here all of my life, and sometimes I don't realize how huge it really is. So like I shared with you, and the one thing I want to stop myself right now and say, we want to keep this a very interactive session. So if you have any questions for us as we're talking, please put it into chat, and one of our moderators will let us know when there's a question. So anytime there's a question, please feel free to put it into chat, and we don't mind that at all. So as I was saying, our state is huge. Our two biggest town or cities in Alaska are Anchorage and Fairbanks. It's a 6.5 hour drive, and I don't know how many miles that is, Rachel. 345 or something like that.
I don't have that exact number.
It's quite some distance. So in Fairbanks is in the interior. Then we have north, that's just probably as equally far. And then where I'm at now down in the southeast, which is a group of islands down in Southeast Alaska. So all of our regions in the state are extremely different, and the level of remoteness is incredible. We've worked with villages that have under 100 people, and we worked with villages that have several hundred to 1,000, and even our largest communities in Alaska are nothing compared to what you see in other states. So it's very difficult when we get down into the details of licensing relative homes, especially if a child comes into custody from one of our remote communities. So this is where we really have put in effort to partner with 229 tribes in our state. There are some hub communities or consortiums or bigger tribes that have built up their tribal child welfare systems to where we can help out the state in licensing homes. So we recognize that when the state of Alaska, our child welfare system is the Office of Children's Services, so it's OCS. When OCS needs to license a home, sometimes it can take quite a while to get out to one of our communities to get that family licensed. So that's one of the reasons that we have really partnered together is we have ICWA workers in all over our state, in the most rural communities out there, who can learn and assist in helping out in licensing homes. One of the other big things I'm sure that many of you are familiar with is the historical trauma between Indigenous people and states, going back to boarding schools and the efforts to try to help Native families by pulling them apart and relocating them, or taking children out of the home, thinking they were going to move them to get a better education, or they didn't understand the culture or home life. So there still is a very strong presence of historical trauma and lack of trust between the state and the tribes, and it's slowly we're making some progress in building up that trust. Still, yet it helps to have the partnership between the tribes, the tribal welfare systems in the state, because having someone come from the tribe is a bit less threatening than having the state come into your home, even when it comes to something like licensing. One of the other things that we have noticed and wanted to conquer over the years is the 2 separate licensing applications. So we have 2 separate processes to become a licensed foster parent. Barb, would you like to share about the state licensing process?
Yes, so in Alaska, we have statutes and regulations that guide our licensing process. It starts out with the applicant sending in a foster care licensing application to the state. We process that application. We complete a home inspection, which we call our standard by standard, which is going over the premise, meaning the whole land or the area that the foster home is located on. It's also going over our foster care regulations, is what it means to be a foster parent. The foster parent then submits references to the state. And then we also do a fingerprint-based background check on all individuals in the home 16 or older. And so that's the state process. Then Mary, you can outline the tribal licensing standards.
Yeah, thank you. And this is where Barbara and I really got to know each other, is the tribal licensing standards. We had put a lot of effort into creating a solid set of standards that meet all of the federal licensing criteria. So our tribal licensing criteria meet all of the 4E requirements. Some of it exceeds what the state requires. Some of it is not as much, because we did want to respect the way that tribes have been working with families for the history of tribes. We know that tribal people have a way of caring for children who are in need, that there always is a couple of safe homes in the community that didn't require this formal licensing process. So we really wanted to maintain the cultural component of that, but yet also recognizing the need to meet the federal 4E requirements. So that's what we put together when we created our tribal licensing standards, applications, and forms. When we first started out, we were not quite as formal. So this has all happened within the past 10 years. So prior to 10 years ago, we had a pretty solid foster care license, tribal foster care licensing packet. And then we added in where we would check the CPS history of families. And this might be a good time to share. Oh, goodness gracious. Let's see if I can do this. To share this document that Barb gave Barb and I a lot of headaches back in the day. Barb, would you like to share what this form is?
Yeah, so before this form came into being, when our tribal partners were licensing a foster home, they were basically doing an Adam Walsh check as far as the child abuse and neglect registry. And at that time, OCS would only provide the information saying yes or no, there was substantiated findings on a child abuse report. Well, then the tribes, based on our information, would go ahead and license a home. Then the home would want to become licensed by OCS, and OCS would say, no, we can't license this home because there was X amount of history on this provider. So the tribes would then say, well, we didn't know that history, and when we licensed this home. And it might have been, say, an individual tribal member who had 10 non-substantiated reports, which the tribes had no access to that information. So then Mary and I, and at that time, another individual, we started looking at how can we share more of the child abuse and neglect registry with our tribal partners when they are licensing a home. And that's when we came up with this form. So it starts out with an authorization for release of information by the individual in a home that is becoming licensed by our tribe. So they complete the first page. Then OCS completes out this section. So in this section, we started sharing more information with our tribal partners for their licensing process regarding our child abuse and neglect registry.
Yeah,
Mary?
thank you, Barb. So before we had this form expanded, like Barb said, tribes would only get minimal information on CPS history. And you can imagine the frustration that tribes would have when they would get this authorization back before we revised it, where it said, oh yes, this home passes, they're eligible for employment, is what they would say. And then we would have it become a state case, and then the state would say that they could not place children in the home. So I remember always saying, why is this home good enough to be tribally licensed, but not good enough to be state licensed? Either we need to make a distinction here, or we need to share information. So a lot of work went into this, and the state is really working hard to share as much information as they can on the CPS history. We also, for the tribal licensing process, will do state and federal background checks. And that, again, for any of you who are doing tribal licensing, know that that can be a challenge as well.
And Mary,
So-
just real quick, it does look like somebody was curious, what is the difference when you're referring to licensing versus certifying a home? And do you have an actual license for this process? This was the question in the chat room.
Yes, so I have heard the term certification. In Alaska, we call our homes fully licensed. So if they meet all of the federal licensing criteria, they're considered a fully licensed home, which means that they meet all of the federal 4E requirements. So that's a great question. So the real big difference between a tribal and state foster care license is that tribal foster care licenses meet the federal 4E regulations. State licensing, they meet the federal requirements, and then they also have some additional state requirements on there. Oops, hold on a
Mary,
sec.
do you want to share the licensing standards that the tribes have developed?
Yeah. So back when we started the work, we had a work group where we didn't have the standards written down. We had a tribal foster care application. So through our tribal state collaboration group, we created this booklet, which is our standards. And I'll just do a quick scroll through. If you want to look at the table of contents, where it has our standards, procedures, then the licensing forms. So everything that a tribal licensing worker would need to do. And then we wanted to make it a really user-friendly manual. So we put in licensing form letters. So like we went through each step of the licensing process. And I do have to add in here that Rachel and her crew at Alaska Center for Resource Families, they not only track the licensing hours for the state, but they do for the tribe as well. ACRF also provides our foster homes with a lot of educational material, the training hours, and will track the training hours for us. Rachel, is there anything you want to add there?
Sure, and including in that slide, so training is an important component. You have to have trained and supported foster families across the board to be able to support these kiddos to heal. And so Mary was referring to historical trauma, and ACRF worked with the Alaska Native Tribal Health Consortium, and we adapted what we call the Alaska Blanket Exercise as a training, experiential training in understanding historical trauma. And OCS has adopted that Alaska blanket exercise into their training of new staff members. So every new OCS staff that comes in has to go through the Alaska blanket exercise. It came from what was called the Kairos blanket exercise, and anyone in Canada that was working with First Nations people had to go through the Kairos blanket exercise, and then Alaska worked collaboratively with Canada to make an Alaska blanket exercise. And I will share that tomorrow, from 1 to 4 p.m. Alaska time, so that's kind of late on East Coast time, but there is a Zoom format of the Alaska blanket exercise. If you're interested in being a part of it, it is free to the public, and another training opportunity, 1 for families and 2 for child welfare workers. The other thing that ACRF has supported and worked with the state and tribes is encouraging families to become dually licensed. While there's double the paperwork and applications, for now, we don't require double the training. And so working in partnership with for example, Tanana Chiefs Conference and OCS, we've held orientations where we go through the state licensing orientation, and then we include a tribal licensing component, explaining to families that, becoming dually licensed has its benefits. For example, if you have a child in a state licensed home and they're dually licensed and there's a transfer of jurisdiction, perhaps that child doesn't have to change placement. And we know that multiple changes in placement is compounding any kind of trauma a child has. And so being dually licensed and having a transfer of jurisdiction, that child can potentially stay in that home because that family is dually licensed. So there's that connection piece, making sure families are educated on what it means to be dually licensed and understand what it means, in working with tribes. Thanks.
Thank you for that, Rachel. And Mary, do you mind, or maybe one of you, the question that came to us is the question is, do you mind sharing what standards you had higher expectations on?
Yeah,
or regulations you were able to be more lenient on? Two parts to that question.
Okay. The 4E regulations, what we did is we took quite a bit of time really getting to know 4E. And this is where I can speak as a tribal partner, being so grateful for our state partners, where they gave tribes the opportunity to be a part of their federal review. So we really got to know the review instrument and knowing what is required for 4E. So what we did is we tried to be creative in looking at the federal requirements and saying, how can we fit this into work that we do already? Or how can we make this process a bit easier for families to deal with, or to go through, not deal with. That's not a nice way to say it. And then I did mention that the tribes did require a bit more than the state at times. Like one that stands out to me in our work was the requirement for a foster family to be certified for CPR. The state didn't have that as a requirement, and as a tribe, we were saying, well, if they're going to be taking care of children, we want to have them certified for CPR. So that's something that we added in, and also using the tribal programming and resources through like Tribal Head Start or any of the other programs. We try to get that training out there, or we try to be very creative as far as bringing people into a hub community from several of the rural communities to provide trainings or the opportunities to meet those requirements that are out there. Of course, we have learned a lot over time and have made adjustments. where we would say they need to get their CPR certification within a year. Sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't. So that's just one example that comes right to mind. So we talked a bit about how the tribal licensing standards came from the result of our tribal state collaboration group. And I think this is really important to note, especially if your state does not have a really strong and cohesive tribal state collaboration group of sorts. It could be called any name, but it's where all of the tribal leaders, like I had mentioned earlier, get together and we sit down and we recognize that it's not just a state problem, that it's a problem that is causing a hardship for our families. And it was a priority from when I started my work that we needed more foster homes. Like I started out with, the work in ICWA is such a challenge, and we may see some results in helping family right away, but oftentimes we don't always see the positive results for years and years, if ever. And so this is something that I personally jumped onto because one of my reasoning is there's not an immediate solution to how to reduce disproportionality or how to help our families become healthier. But what we can into custody, we don't have to add on to their trauma by having them placed with a stranger or outside of their community. So the Tribal State Collaboration Group created a subgroup, the Tribal Licensing Foster Care Group, I believe we called it. And we put a lot of time and effort into it by going painfully at times through the 4E regulations and looking at what other tribes had created before us and put together our standards. And so not only what was really impressive is where we had with ICWA, our states and tribes working together, where there is where it can be an adversarial relationship where we could just be fighting it out all the time, because we know states aren't doing everything they're supposed to do. We know that tribes could be doing things a bit differently, or it gets really confusing when we have so many tribes in one state. We decided to put that aside and to focus on working together to make change. Even though we had differences in what we were required to do, the state has very, very strict regulations that they need to follow, and tribes have tribal customs and traditions that they need to follow. And there's so many tribes in Alaska that it really took a huge effort to be able to work together to create this document, to be quite honest. And it took a lot of trust in each other, a lot of I won't call it arguing, but I'll say really difficult conversations to get through some of that, because it is a different way of thinking. We are challenging the state, and we're challenging ourselves as tribes to look at this differently, knowing that we do need to meet the federal regulations, yet also wanting to keep culture within the licensing process. So we were fortunate enough to have a group of individuals who came together and pushed through that process, and had partners like Rachel at ACRF who were just 100% on board in helping us get through it and brainstorm on how we can meet those requirements without having to really disrupt or change how tribes operated. And that's really important with the families that we work with, because they're already experiencing whatever trauma they're going through. They now have a state system involved in their life. So if we want them to get licensed, like all of you know who work in licensing, you see the application and it feels like you have to you have to open up your entire life. So we wanted to make this process simpler and easier for families. I remember events that Rachel and I held together where we called it, I don't remember what we called it, but it was where we brought in families to become dual licensed. And the state was also involved as well, where we had a group from the state licensing unit in, and then we had the tribe unit in, and we would sit down and help families go through each licensing packet. Crazy enough, we had to have 2 separate fingerprint machines because the state couldn't accept the tribal fingerprints, and the tribe needed fingerprints, but we couldn't get them from the state. So we sat there and we went through it. The great thing about it is, let me go to the next slide, is that our state finally noticed it just recently and asked us to find a way to what we call dually licensed foster homes. So the Department of Health and Social Services Commissioner's office gave the directive to OCS to find a way, or to look at how to dually license foster homes. When it comes to the powers that be and those of us who do the work, there's a disconnect, right? So we were fortunate to have our state administration notice that, hey, why are these families having to do 2 separate applications and do 2 sets of fingerprint checks? So they called up Barbara and said, let's find a way to make it so where families only have to do 1 application. But Barb, you want to share some of the barriers that we encountered?
So we've been working on this process, like Mary said, for duly licensed for quite a while. And years ago, when we were working on this process, we came up against barriers. And barriers ended up being basically in the sharing of information, primarily criminal justice information. So when OCS does a fingerprint-based background check, OCS can see the fingerprint results from both the state and federal. So we can see all the crimes that have occurred, both state and federal. And if the tribe does a fingerprint-based background check, they don't have access to a lot of information. So again, just kind of like our child abuse and neglect registry, OCS has access to all this information and the tribes don't. So the tribes might say, okay, we have enough information to say we're going to license this home. And again, the state will say, no, there's a lot more information. We can't honor that license. So in this process, we are working with Casey families to come up with a letter to our administration to have them assist us in overcoming some of these barriers, because the CJIS requirements of not sharing are through our Department of Public Safety, and they're in a different department than OCS is. They have different commissioners than OCS has. So we need at a higher level to help us overcome these barriers. We are in the process of getting some of our tribes together to look at the paperwork so that we can resolve the issue of instead of having 2 applications, we'll have just 1 application. But we still need to work on the barriers at the same time. Mary, anything you want to add?
Yeah, I just have to say it was so exciting to hear that the commissioner's office in Alaska recognized that doing 2 applications was silly and wanted us to work on combining our applications to do 1. Of course, what they thought it was just taking 2 applications and kind of meshing them together and, figuring things out, but they didn't fully understand the barriers like Barbara was just talking about. So what we're currently working on is, I'll just go to the next slide, is we took that directive, and as a tribal partner, that was, as soon as I heard that I was like, this is going to be one of our priorities. So like most states, the pandemic has put our Alaska's child welfare services in crisis mode. We are in our state, OCS is at one of the highest turnover rates, and they have a high vacancy rate of, I believe, over 50%. So there's a high vacancy rate of state social workers that can help out just doing the day-to-day work with our families. And when we have over 65% of Alaska Native children in custody, we understand we've been in a pandemic. We understand the vacancy rate, but what we refuse to happen is to let our families not get the services that they deserve, especially when we have ICWA workers all over the state who are located right there in the community. Some of them who have been previous state social workers before. So one of the other efforts we have in Alaska is our state tribal child welfare compact. This compact is a government to government relationship, recognizing that tribes can do the work just as well as the state. And we have 5 scopes of services under that compact. And one of them is around licensing. And I can pull up that document, Barb, if you want to talk about that some.
So this licensing assist scope of work allows the tribes, or allows the state to send tribes referrals for work. In this particular scope of work, we send referrals to our tribal partners for them to be able to license a state foster home. So for example, in Fairbanks, all of our CCLS staff, this is our licensing staff, are located in Fairbanks. And the northern region is a very large region, and staff have to travel great distances and small planes to get to some of our rural communities, even to some of our hub communities, for example, Nome. And weather depending can delay a state licensing worker from Fairbanks to get to Nome very timely. So right now in Nome, there's a tribe called Coeric, and they have licensing staff. And so our our Fairbanks licensing supervisor will send a referral to the Coeric licensing staff for them to conduct licensing work for the state. And in this compact, part of the services that our tribes can provide under the compact is recruitment of foster homes in their community. If you can scroll down just a little bit, Mary. They can also provisionally license a foster home under the guidance of state workers. They will also do conversions from what we call a provisional license, which is a 1-year license for us, to a biannual license. So our tribal partners, they will go in, they will assist the applicants with our OCS application. They will go into the home and conduct the inspections in standard by standard. If any variances are needed in the home, for example, window sizes, our tribal partners will work with foster care applicants in completing the variance application. So our tribal partners basically do all of the licensing work for us in the rural communities. And this is a great asset for us because we often can't get to the communities. And so we've got tribal partners in the communities that can do the work and get the work done timely. So it's been a great asset having the scopes of works. So some of the other scopes we have under the compact are diligent relative searches, ongoing relative searches, the in-home safety walkthroughs on our unlicensed relatives, of course, the licensing assist. Mary, I can't remember what the fifth one is.
Family contact.
Family contact, yes. So the tribal state compacting, I believe, has been really great work.
I could add on top of there, again, with the tremendous partnership with Casey Families, COERIC has invited Alaska Center for Resource Families up to Nome. They fly families in from the regional communities, and we have a foster parent appreciation event, including 6 hours of face-to-face training. So they're also incorporating that support and training. Tribes are including that support and training component. The Tanana Chiefs Conference does the same thing every year. They do a foster family appreciation / recruitment event. And as Mary had said in the past, it started with us bringing our silos together. OCS workers needed training, tribal ICWA workers needed training, and foster parents needed training. And they're all working toward the same thing. So we, at Tanana Chiefs Conference, we've combined trainings, inviting all families and workers together. Tlingit and Haida and the Alaska Center for Resource Families just partnered on a Webby conference on cultural approaches to permanency. And it wasn't just foster families. We had tribal and state workers coming to that too. So that education component doesn't just reach the families, but it also reaches the providers and workers that are engaging with them. But it is through those partners like COERIC and TCC and Tlingit Haida and Kenaitze and Community of St. Paul Island and all these organizations that are taking on, as Barbara just said, this heavy lifting.
I did want to share under the tribal state compact, the state is paying the tribes some monies to do the work and also to set up the infrastructure to do the work.
Yeah, and there was an exciting bill that was just recently passed that codified the state tribal compact into legislation. So even though we're not guaranteed the funding in there, it is written in our state law now that the compact is there, it's real, which is nice. And it gives us some push behind that as far as continuing on that funding. We as tribes, there are 17 co-signers in the compact, and we are doing a lot of work right now as far as implementation and showing that we are making a difference. And this is where it can get complex, is showing the measurables of the work that our tribal workers are doing. And as you can imagine, that this has not been an easy process, because when Barbara and I first started working together, we had our one-page document that we showed earlier, that was the authorization of release of information, and it wasn't even what you saw today. It had just a couple of check boxes on it. So the state was able to give the tribes very limited information. Now through the compact, we have Uh, Again, it's limited, but it's access to ORCA, which is the state data management system, to where for tribes to get credit for the work done in any of those scopes of work, we were able to get access into ORCA and are able to enter in our notes into the system. But it did take a lot of work because ORCA is a system that's new to tribes. And it took all of the attorneys working together to figure out how can we allow outside people into our data system and have our information remain safe. But in the end, where we're at right now is our state is looking at a new data system, but we have worked together and built the relationship to where the state is inviting tribes through this tribal state collaboration group to be a part of the discussion in what tribes would like to see in the data management system, what we need access to, what needs to be built. So as the state works to picking out an updated system, tribes get to be involved. And what tribes will do will be to continue to push and push and push and ask for more information, because the state is working with our families. Again, 65% of the kids in custody are tribal citizens. If not Tlingit and Haida, it's one of the other 229 tribes in our state. So we feel if we are going to be working with the state in this friendly fashion, that the state needs to reciprocate that and work with us so we have access to information and data that they have as well. Even though this is a goal of ours, it's something that is easier said than done, because we do have to work around privacy and parents' rights to privacy, and it's a work in progress. So, but it's something that we are working on.
It looks like there's another question there, Mary, in the chat room. I'm assuming that it is just an Alaska tribal state compact, but the question is that tribal compact national or just in Alaska? And if so, do you know when that was enacted?
Yeah, the tribal compact is just in Alaska. So, and I think it was 2016, Barb, is that correct, or 2017?
I believe 16, but it's ongoing.
Yeah, so it was signed in 2016, and we do have ongoing negotiations every year to negotiate what the compact's going to look like. It's always dependent on the state's budget, and with the compact being codified into law, now we know we have that power behind it, so we can push a bit more to try to say, okay, you asked for us to do this work, so we are going to need some money to do this work. And there's been a lot of barriers along the way as well. In our rural communities, like Barb was talking about earlier, it can be really difficult for an OCS worker to get out there. We have really, really bad weather at times, a lot of snow, rain. The planes that travel out to our small communities are tiny, and so travel can sometimes take days and days. And we want to be able to utilize our ICRA workers that we are working to get trained and who have been trained to do the work, to be able to provide to the state. So we are working in true partnership. Along with the compact, we do have training requirements that our tribal staff need to go through. So for each scope of work, there's a training attached to it, and we are required to enter that information into the state data management system. tribes are growing and becoming more sophisticated, I guess you would say. There are tribes in Alaska that are going toward becoming 4E direct, that have taken on that opportunity to get through the preprint and have their everything in place that's required by the federal government. But in the meantime, we really need the state, and even after, we need our state to be a strong partner, because all of our tribal citizens are also residents of the state of Alaska. So we do have to recognize that if the state takes jurisdiction, that it is up to the family, the parents, if they both have to agree if they want to transfer over to tribal jurisdiction. Not all tribes in Alaska initiate their own child welfare cases. There are a couple of tribes that have 4E maintenance agreements to where we can transfer jurisdiction from state to tribal court, and which again leads to the need to have a tribal licensing standard that meets the 4E regulation. I'm going to pause for a second to see if there's any questions, because that's a lot of information.
And folks can either raise your hand, unmute, or use the Q&A if you have any questions. And Laura is helping, as well as Rachel, to get these documents loaded in the chat room so folks can upload them to their system. So thank you guys for doing that.
So as you all think of questions that you may have, I do want to share like some of the positive outcomes of going through all of this work. Tribes have always asked the state, please keep us informed of what's going on in our state. We want to know too. We want to know, especially if it impacts our tribal citizens. And so through the efforts of the Tribal State Collaboration Group, we are able to participate in state hiring committees where if the state is hiring a position that has a lot of impact on tribal work, or just actually any position within OCS, they can reach out and ask for a tribal representative to be a part of that hiring process. And the state really has embraced this, and tribal partners, when available, and we try to make it a priority to be a part of interviewing, sitting in on the interviews to find a candidate that we feel fits the needs of not only what the state needs from a worker, but what would also be helpful for tribes. Barb has, you want to talk about the variance process a bit, Barb?
Yes, so for general variance applications, we use tribal partners that sit on the variance committees at the regional level. Then when a general variance is denied at the regional level, it goes to a statewide general variance committee for a second level review. And we have tribal partners on that level review of our general variances as well.
Yeah, so it's been a really helpful process for the state to really open that up, because it allows the tribes to learn the federal law, and we look at it from a different, each individual looks at federal law from a different lens, and it can be interpreted in many ways. And we probably will see that if we looked throughout the different states in our country, that the lens that we look at regulations are different. So by allowing tribes to be a part of the state variance committee, or even hiring, we're looking at it through another lens. Rachel, did you want to talk some about some of the work that we have done as far as partnering together with ACRF and how we have helped support our tribal foster parents?
Sure. I think an important component as all of this collaborative work that the tribal state group has done, helping workers understand ICWA better. There's also the importance of training and educating out of preference placement foster homes a little bit better. And I think that's part of this partnership too. It's not just, it's also boots on the ground that we have to be making sure understands the message. And ACRF has doing a monthly teleconference called Let's Talk ICWA. And we take just a small component of ICWA and break it down for an hour and talk to families. And that is one of the most populated trainings we have monthly. There is about a minimum of 15 people that join that. And it's not just foster families, but it's also ICWA workers that are just coming onto the job, or OCS workers that maybe found the topic of interest. And so weaving in components of that, like educational components, as well as just understandings have, I think, helped strengthen relationships. Other things that we've done together is recruitment efforts, barring pandemic in the past 2 years. But even then, I think we've gotten creative at times. But prior to the pandemic, we were meeting OCS, ACRF, and the tribe. So for me, particularly in Fairbanks, it was Tanana Chiefs Conference. And we'd go to different places in the community to recruit. And so we're showing the united front of tribes, state child welfare and partners, showing that united front. We're also trying to honor foster parents and recognize the importance and value of relative caregiving, and not just becoming licensed or diligent relative search, and helping foster families feel like a part of the team. And all of that is part of that collaboration. It's that communication between, what kind of training do you need up in Coeric this year, or up in Nome this year for the foster parent appreciation event? I haven't been to Kotzebue in a while. How many homes do we have there? Do we need to concentrate more on recruitment, or do we need some retention going on in there? So I think a lot of the partnership there includes going to the source and finding out what they need, and helping fulfill that, kind of gap filling, if you will.
Yeah, thank you, Rachel, for sharing that. And I think it has been so helpful to, like, the Let's Talk ICWA, or the other ways that we help get education out there and training for not only foster parents, but for tribal and state staff has been really helpful. And I have to say, I tell Rachel this all the time, if I ever have a question or a need, I call Rachel, because she knows if she can't do the training, she can find someone to do it. And if I need to know anything about state licensing, I call Barbara, because she knows that and will help me figure it out. So it really takes the collaboration for us to keep moving forward. And that's our goal, is we want to see forward movement. Not one of us is stuck on the idea of my way is the right way. We really want to see forward movement, because we see that families need that help and assistance. I did want to share that Tlingit and Haida has an office in Seattle. Tlingit and Haida has, I think the last count was 34,000 tribal citizens around the country, and actually outside of the country as well. But we have recently opened up an office in Seattle, and we're working with the state of Washington. In Washington, they have, some of you may be there, when they work with tribes, they have what is called the 1919 agreement. And we are looking at creating an agreement with the state of Washington, so we can continue this, we can expand this work actually outside of Alaska, where Washington is looking at having an agreement their first agreement with a tribe outside of their state of Washington. So what we're trying to do is have solid work that meets all of the requirements, that is also culturally sound and based, and have it move forward and to be, we want to create procedures, standards, documents, ways of doing things that we can pass on to other tribes, and where they can take it and customize it and make it their own. So everything that we've created, we create it knowing that we want to share it with any tribe who would like to make it their own. And this, I know it's the same with Rachel. Any of the trainings that she has put together, she's always willing to share. We're always looking at how to share resources. So if one of us wants to host a training, or if we have a family member that's interested in becoming licensed and needs emergency equipment, we look at tribal programming sometimes through child care assistance to provide the fire extinguishers, smoke detectors, etc. We try to be really creative in trying to help families become licensed and to make it as easy as possible. Because what we do know is that the families out there who are taking care of the children are doing us a favor. They're such a huge blessing for that child to take in a child that they know or that lives in their community, where we don't have to create further trauma. And that's one of the driving forces behind our work, is we really are doing it for the children and the families out there. Well, we are also working on how to figure out what's going on with disproportionality. How can we help our communities become healthier? But in the meantime, when we do have such a high rate of kids going into custody, we want them to be placed in homes that they know and that they're comfortable with, or at least their own community. When it comes to Alaska, it can be very difficult sometimes to place in their own community if it's a community under 100 people. So the message that we like to get out there is that every single one of us that is involved in this work, whether you're an ICWA worker, whether you're someone doing prevention work or working with youth or elders, that we're all recruiters. We all are recruiters for foster homes, and sharing that message that we want to help our youth to have a chance at life, not have to suffer through more trauma, that we all are recruiters. And also that even if a home is state licensed, that it's not just the state's responsibility, it's our responsibility as well to help retain that home, to help provide the support that they need, and try to help in any way to retain that home, whether they're tribal or state licensed, because they are doing such an amazing an amazing job and such an amazing favor to all of us by taking in our children and helping preserve the culture and helping that child feel comfortable as they are doing their work to process through their emotions while their parents are doing their work to become healthy. So we're hoping that this approach will be more positive, and the end result will make a difference in our system. Knowing that we can't, even though the state is tasked with child welfare, that we know the state cannot do it on its own, that it takes the effort of the entire community, not just the tribes, but other organizations that are out there that are willing to jump on board with you to get through it. So that is a short version of some of the history of Alaska, what we have done in our work to have duly licensed foster homes. We hope in the near future that and near, of course, is never near. It's always a couple of years out. We hope to be able to have one licensing application for families that the state could place in a home that we license, or we could place in a home that the state license. And until that happens, perhaps have a condensed version of our licensing applications if they're already state licensed or already tribal licensed. So we're trying to be creative. And that's where we're at right now in Alaska, is we're at that point to where we're we are looking at right now the things that we have control of, because we don't have control of, like Barb said, there's different commissioners for different departments. We don't have control. So we have to put together all of these points to sell it, and then also have our state make some changes to really understand the need for tribes to have that information sharing that's needed from the state. And just all of those pieces in place so we can get our help when we work with a potential foster family, that we could just do one application, because goodness knows one application is difficult enough. It's quite overwhelming when you look at it. So we appreciate you all listening to us, and we enjoy sharing the work that we have done. And we're not done yet in our state. We're going to continue on and push forward as far as we can until our time working is done. And with that, I just want to say thank you, Ganeshish, for listening. And I want to open it up for any questions.
And if there are no questions, I'm grateful we were able to get some of them answered throughout this presentation. And I really, really want to say thank you, Mary and Barbara and Rachel, for your time and energy and all the work you've done in Alaska. The Capacity Building Center for Tribes really loves to hear from, folks who are doing the work and who are doing the hard work and the committed work. We have uploaded a lot of the documents in the chat room, but Laura will be following up with the participants with those documents, and also a survey that she posted in the chat room, but will be attached to the email as well. It looks like, Laura, there was a question that came in about how often do you meet with the state? And I think there was one earlier as well about not only how often do you meet with the state, but recognizing the length of time all of this, work has taken. But how often do you right now meet with the state folks?
That's a good question. We meet all of the time. We have several different projects going on at once. I have to, formally through the Tribal State Collaboration Group, we are committed to meet once a year all together in person. And then there's, like Rachel had mentioned, there's 5 regions in our state. So each region has committed to have a regional tribal state meeting once a month. So we can keep in contact with the people in charge of that region and know what's going on once a month. And then there's 5 co-chairs, tribal co-chairs of our Tribal State Collaboration Group. I'm the Southeast Regional Tribal Co-Chair, and we meet with the state leadership team every other month. And then on the off months, the 5 tribal co-chairs, we would meet with the state director to where we share the concerns of our tribal caucus. And our tribal caucus meets twice a month. So we're continuously getting in information from the tribes from around the state where our problem areas are. And we have the opportunity to share with state administration or just to the director herself about what's going on and what we need help with, or and often a lot of how we can make things better together.
I also meet weekly with a tribal state training work group. Then monthly, we have what's called office hours for the compact. That's where subject matter experts are from the state are available to answer any questions our tribal staff may have regarding their work under the compact. So we're meeting all the time together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it sounds like it, which is how to get things done. I know a lot of times in Minnesota, under the requirements, when things become codified into law, they may say once a year you must, but we all recognize when we're doing this work, it has to be more frequent than that. One of the things that they talked about or somebody asked about is just a timeline. And if you have one, and if you do, we can always provide that later. But just to get a sense of, when things began, how long it took. I think a lot of folks don't always know that, that when collaboration occurs, or, if agreements are written or compacts are written, the length of time that it sometimes takes to get those written. And so I don't know if there is a timeline that you have or that we could later provide for folks, but that was one of the questions is, do you have one?
Yeah, that's a great question. We do have a timeline for the Tribal State Collaboration Group, but it does include the work that we've done around licensing and the work that we've done around the compact, and we would be happy to share that. One thing I think I forgot to say in the very beginning was the Tribal State Collaboration Group came about 30 years ago as a result of a requirement for Title IV-B funding, where it required the states and the tribes to talk together. Mm-hmm. So that is how our Tribal State Collaboration Group came to be. I remember one of my previous directors telling me he tells a story about being in Seattle and all the states were there and the tribes were there, and they were given this directive, or they were told this criteria to where the state and the tribes had to get together, and the Alaska people were there and they said, well, we're all here, let's just get together and meet. So that was the beginning of our Tribal State Collaboration Group. And after that, Tribal State would meet 3 times a year. Then we had a reorganization in, I think, 2014 or 15, to where we were hearing that, everything's happening up here at this level. It's not getting down to the worker level. So that's where we did a reorganization of Tribal State and had it, where we all met together once a year. Then we asked our regions to have monthly meetings, and then our workers will even meet weekly with our state partners. So I would be happy to share that timeline with you, and so you can get it out. And we're hoping to have an updated timeline because we've had a lot of work done since that timeline I know that is out there was created.
Mm-hmm. Great. We'll be sure to get that to our participants. And, I just, again, want to say thank you. The Center for Tribes recognizes, again, the collaboration and the work that it takes. And so we are looking at some future conversations and webinars, with that collaborative work. So again, thank you so much. Folks have time, please fill out the evaluation, and you can either screenshot it off of the technology nowadays, right? I see, we have the code there up there on the screen, so you guys can take a look at it there. And then, give us some ideas of more webinars that you want to, or if you yourself have some work out there in Indian country that you feel you want to share and let other tribes know about. We're absolutely interested in all of that. So again, miigwech, thank you everybody for this time today. So take care.
Thank you.
Thanks. Have a good one.